We'll get back to North Korea, but first we must begin with the horrifying events in Charlottesville, Virginia this weekend. It all began with a gathering of people who are anti-immigrant, anti-Semitic, anti-black, what some might call anti-American. These racist protesters were there to oppose the removal of a Confederate monument. The events ended with a terrifying scene as a car drove into a crowd of counter-protesters, injuring many and killing one. The president responded, but disturbingly didn't single out the racists, instead condemning, quote, hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides, unquote. Let's bring in a panel. Melody Barnes was director of the White House Domestic Policy Council under President Obama. She's now a visiting professor at the University of Virginia. Rick Perlstein is a historian of American conservatism. Also a historian, Tim Naftali was director of the Nixon Presidential Library, and before that also taught at the University of Virginia. Melody, let me ask you, how much of this is an eruption of something that has been simmering underneath, and I mean particularly simmering ever since the election of an African-American as president? And what did you notice in the White House? What information were you getting about these kinds of movements and these kind of currents in America?
Well, first of all, Fareed, thank you so much for having me this morning. And I actually want to go back further than this past election or my time in the White House. And I would say to the nation and to your viewers that we can't view what happened yesterday as a Charlottesville problem or a Virginia problem, that this is the American problem, that the roots of what happened yesterday go back to 1619, to the founding of our country. And we will not only do ourselves a grave disservice, but we will inflict more harm on ourselves as a country if we don't contextualize what happened yesterday in the roots of white supremacy and entitlement that led to a young woman being killed yesterday. But it is a scene that we have seen over and over and over in our country through slavery and through lynchings and through the civil rights movement that led us to yesterday. And until we have a cold, hard, honest look at our American history and the DNA of America, we will not be able to deal with these issues. They were further inflamed, I believe, as people reacted and responded to President Obama's election in 2008 and re-election in 2012. And certainly President Trump has created an enabling environment through his statements over the last many years. But this is a history that belongs to the ages.
Rick Perlstein, you have studied and written a lot about the right in America. Is it fair to say that this has always been, to take the modern version of what Melody Barnes was talking about, there has always been this undercurrent within some elements of the conservative movement, or is that unfair?
I think that's very fair, and I endorse profoundly the substance of what Melody Barnes is saying. Think about this. What the people were marching in defense of in Charlottesville, Virginia, was a statue to a man who led troops into battle in treason against the United States in order to defend slavery. Starting in the early 60s, when the civil rights movement was basically challenging white supremacy with the power of people's bodies and religious faith, that movement to basically celebrate the Confederacy enjoyed enormous resurgence in the early 1960s. That's when we began to see these statues being built and Confederate flags being waved. And ever since then, that sort of lost cause, kind of wave the bloody shirt ideology, and the ideology that whenever something goes wrong in your world, you can blame a diabolical conspiracy. You know, this is kind of McCarthyite language. And that's where Donald Trump comes in. His willingness to kind of blame this diabolical conspiracy of liberal media, the establishment in both parties, jihadists, and all the rest. And this is the kind of rhetoric you see in right-wing media, both kind of the bottom-feeding media in Breitbart, but also in places like Fox News and the National Rifle Association, whose basically model is to terrify people to believe that America is on fire, that liberals are out to get you, that both parties are out to get you, that Donald Trump is out to protect you, and that you need to march through the streets with guns, which is exactly what happened in Charlottesville, in order to protect your family, in order to protect your identity. And when we see Donald Trump saying something like, the problem that is revealed in Charlottesville is that children can't go out in front of their yards and play, this is a direct signal to the worst, most corrosive white supremacists who, by the way, are calling their rally a rally to unite the right. They see this as a unifying issue. So yes, it's great that Marco Rubio has denounced the president. It's great that Ted Cruz has denounced the president. But it'd be great to hear Republicans who don't have presidential ambitions against Donald Trump denounce the president.
Tim Naftali, the extraordinary thing here is how this has really come out. And as Rick Perlstein says, they're being quite open and blatant about what it is they're talking about. It used to be quieter, right?
It used to be, but I want to make a point about that statue, okay? Because one of the problems we have in America is we don't deal with our history very well. We have these moments where liberty expands, and when a country undergoes real social change, and it's at those moments that you get this reaction. That statue is from the 20s. There were four, I used to live in Charlottesville, there were four Confederate statues from the 20s, not from 1880. Why the 20s? Because this was after World War I, and there had been enormous social change in the United States. This is the time when you had the second coming of the KKK.
Right.
The 1960s, we saw the return of the Stars and Bars. Why? Because of a fear among white supremacists that they were losing their country, and we're getting it again. So the one thing to keep in mind is we have this cycle in this country of terrible reaction. And each time it's a test of moral courage on the part of our leaders. Senator Orrin Hatch is not running for president. He showed real courage. President Trump showed moral cowardice yesterday. There are moments in our history when we need our president to stand up to the reaction and say, that is not who we are. In the 1960s, the Republican Party, and Rick knows more about this than I do, was better at policing the fringe. They called it the John Birch Society, than they are today. They are not able to police the fringe. This fringe seems to be mainstream in the Republican Party. That's the fear for the country. That's the problem.
We'll be back in a moment to talk about the big questions of the future. Where do we go from here? What is the way out of this deep polarization in America?